Channel's Week in Review. Will there be a Palestinian state before the end of the year? Distributing food for the Jewish hungry, sitting down with the director of Fiddler on the Roof, and more of the Jewish news that's changing your world right now in this episode of the Week in Review. Hello, and welcome to the Jewish Channel's Week in Review. I'm Stephen I. Weiss. Will there be a Palestinian state before the end of the year? That's the question on many minds as we turn from the U.S.-Israeli drama of the past couple weeks to a summer of intense international negotiations and debate. Palestinian leadership has suggested it will seek recognition as a state at the United Nations in September. The Israeli government is opposed to the unilateral declaration, as is the administration of President Barack Obama. Beyond that, though, things could be pretty murky. The resolution will likely come up for a vote in both the General Assembly and the Security Council, though it would only become considered international law if it passed without a veto in the Security Council. The United States is ready to veto the resolution. What the U.S. is hoping for is to get more countries on board, so that opposition to a unilateral declaration seems like more than just a U.S.-Israel alliance. Trying to get more countries to join the U.S. has been a large part of the strategy of the Obama administration's recent efforts on Israeli-Palestinian relations, including Obama's Middle East speech of 2 weeks ago. Other than the United States, the only member of the Security Council that's already indicated it would oppose the Palestinian statehood resolution is Germany, and Germany is a temporary member of the Security Council. Of the 5 permanent Security Council members, the U.S. is banking the most on England and France, though neither country has suggested it is yet willing to be part of the U.S. efforts. As one example of the kind of pressure being brought to bear in those countries, British Prime Minister David Cameron has requested to have his name removed from a list of patrons of the local branch of the Jewish National Fund, or JNF. While his office cited, quote, time constraints as the reason for his decision, it comes after intense lobbying by a group called Stop the JNF, which has claimed this episode as a victory in their campaign against JNF. Cameron was made an honorary patron of the JNF as a result of becoming head of Britain's Conservative Party 5 years ago. Meantime, the U.S. relationship with the Jewish state is taking a twist with a new U.S. ambassador to Israel. Daniel Shapiro is familiar to many in Jewish leadership and media as the person who handled Jewish relations for the Obama campaign in 2008. Most recently, the 41-year-old Shapiro was employed at the National Security Council, where he headed up the Middle East and North Africa desk. A native of Chicago's Jewish community, Shapiro speaks both Hebrew and Arabic. And if Shapiro has any issues with his personal security detail in Israel, he might want to hire a man named Arik Ze'evi. Ze'evi is now the gold medalist in Judo at the prestigious Moscow Grand Prix. Here he can be seen in footage from the 2004 Olympics in Athens, where he won a bronze medal. Ze'evi's victory in this year's Grand Prix drew a lot of attention because of this bout in the quarterfinals, in which the Israeli Ze'evi was paired with an Egyptian, Ramadan Darwish. After Ze'evi's victory, Darwish walked away before shaking hands with Ze'evi and had to be ordered by the referee to return, where he offered a curt bow. Ze'evi hopes to compete in the 2012 Olympics in London, and this latest victory has brought him within striking distance of that goal. A very different kind of goal is the eradication of hunger in the Jewish community. Rebecca Honig-Friedman reports on recent efforts during the holiday weekend.
The Green Market at Union Square Park is where New Yorkers come to buy farm-fresh produce. But at 6 p.m. on Memorial Day, these volunteers from the Masbia network of kosher soup kitchens were getting ready to pounce on the produce that isn't sold and use it to feed New York's hungry.
Instead of schlepping it back home, they donate it to emergency food providers like soup kitchens and food pantries.
Typically, the collection at the Union Square Market is done by the citywide food rescue organization City Harvest. But because of problems getting staff to work on the Memorial Day holiday, today Masbia, one of the main recipients of the Green Market collection, is running the show. And it's a logistical feat.
It's when all these 20, 25 tents collapse their tent and decide to go home that we need to get the produce, harvest the produce right at that time. Nobody wants to leave it on the floor, and nobody wants to schlep it home, and we need to be there at that moment. So we need a lot of volunteers.
And the dozen or so volunteers ranged in age and occupation. These teenagers came at the urging of their friend, who had previously helped out at a Masbia soup kitchen as part of a school community service day.
Because I told them that it was really cool and that they should definitely try it out.
And this first-time volunteer a substitute teacher and previous Must-Be a donor, was impressed with the effort.
I'm amazed at the generosity of the people in Union Square, and it feels very nice to help in a small way to get the food from one place to another.
Over the course of an hour, Must-Be volunteers collected an abundance of potatoes, spring onions, kale, and arugula. To find out what will become of the food collected at the Union Square Green Market, tune in to the full broadcast version of the Week in Review.
Thank you, Rebecca. Also relevant to Memorial Day weekend was the recent approval of a Jewish chaplain's monument at Arlington National Cemetery. A bill proposing the monument passed the Senate on Thursday after previously passing the House. But when it comes to remembering Jewish contributions in the United States, of course the cultural impact is very much worthy of note. And there are few Jewish cultural projects that have had as big an impact as Fiddler on the Roof. The famous musical has been seen by millions and evolved in countless adaptations. The director of the original movie, Norman Jewison, was the subject of a recent retrospective, and our own Christian Needon stopped by.
Fiddler on the Roof is one of the most well-known films in the world, and a gateway to the works of Jewish humorist Shalom Aleichem. This past week, the Film Society of Lincoln Center hosted a retrospective of Fiddler director Norman Jewison's works. And the 84-year-old filmmaker reflected on the Jewish credentials his last name brought him, despite a Protestant upbringing in Canada.
I wrote a book once, This Terrible Business Has Been Good to Me. It's an autobiography. And the first line of the book is, all my life, as long as I can remember, I've always wanted to be a Jew. And I was called Jew boy and Jewy all my life. So don't talk to me about anti-Semitism. I know all about that.
Jewison said this confusion over his name briefly made him think United Artists head Arthur Krim had made a mistake when he called the director to a secret meeting, as he recalled during a discussion with Sony Pictures co-president Michael Barker.
And then Arthur said, the reason we brought you here is to ask you what you would think if we asked you to produce and direct the film version of Fiddler on the Roof. And my heart came up into my throat, and I thought, oh my God, they think I'm Jewish.
From that point forward, everyone thinks Norman's Jewish.
Son of a Jew. Here I am, sitting here. What am I going to say? So I walked to the window and I looked down into 7th Avenue there, and it seemed like forever. It was probably at least 2 minutes. And I came back and I sat down and I said, what about Jerry Robbins? Why can't he direct the film? No, gee, we had such a terrible experience on
West Side Story.
Yeah, on the other film, and gee, no, he's not a film director. He's a theater director.
Choreographer.
So I was sitting there, and I said, what would you say if I told you I'm a goy? And I looked at all their faces, and they all went like this, and that's when I realized how smart Arthur Krim was. He covered beautifully, and he said, why do you think we would ask you to direct this film? We don't want a 7th Avenue Yiddish production.
To hear more from Norman Jewison, including why he chose not to cast a Broadway legend in the lead role of the film version of Fiddler on the Roof, please tune into the full broadcast edition of the Week in Review.
Thank you, Christian. Continuing the musical theme, Christian Needon attended a Yemenite Jewish music festival at the 92nd Street Y last week. And here's his report on that as part of TJC's partnership with the 92Ys Resource Center for Diversity.
Israeli musicians filled the main performance hall of the 92nd Street Y with song last week, but with a sound that evoked the southern Arabian Peninsula. That's because this was a Yemenite music festival featuring 3 of the biggest names in Yemenite and Mizrahi, or Middle Eastern, Jewish music. And to kick things off, New York's Consul General Ido Aharoni told the audience about his Yemenite Jewish family, which settled in an area of Tel Aviv whose name translates as the neighborhood of hope.
Tel Aviv in the 40s and the 50s, some of the families lived in extreme poverty. Despite of the difficulties, and this was the situation of Yemenites throughout the country, in Rosh Ha'ain, in Rishon LeZion, in Jerusalem, in Rehovot. Despite of the difficulties, there was always a strong, visible, vocal element of joy and selflessness. And music was a big part of that joy. Despite of the fact that there was no money, despite of the fact that there was sometimes no food, there was always a great deal of joy. And I'm happy to be here tonight to share my family's own story with you, because we're going to have a great display of joy and music tonight.
That display began with some instrumental work from bouzouki virtuoso Avram Pengas. The night's first singer was Natanel Nagar. Next was Zion Golan. Finally, Avner Gadassi took the stage to close out the night. Reporting from the 92Y for the Jewish Channel, I'm Christian Needon.
Thank you, Christian. That's all for this week. From all of us here at the Jewish Channel, be well. The Jewish Channel is available on cable: IO Optimum Cable Channel 291, Time Warner Cable Channel 528, RCN Channel 268, Verizon Fios Channel 900, and Cox Cable Channel 1. For more information, visit tjctv.com.